By the end of a 10-week minor lacrosse season, a great goal for coaches working with beginners and younger lacrosse players is to train players to be able to identify a 2-on-1 and then execute in breaking it down to a 1-on-0, a concept which applies to most team sports. In lacrosse, this is accomplished by ball carriers being a threat until pressured, or carrying until pressured as we say, and if no pressure arrives by the time the player gets to the prime scoring area, having the discipline to shoot while not making any unnecessary or high-risk passes. On a fast break against defensively, either a 2-on-1, 3-on-2, 4-on-3, or 5-on-4 in the open floor, defenders who are at a numerical disadvantage attempt to play in between the offensive players with their sticks up, which is called splitting. Splitting can be accomplished by two defenders playing beside each other, usually in a vertical line relative to one another, otherwise alone with one defender in between the two offenders widthwise. In transition to defense, defenders who are splitting should initially give more attention to the players who are closest to their net, eventually forcing a pass from the ball carrier as they become a threat in the prime scoring area. Otherwise allowing the ball carrier to shoot based on inventory, i.e. how good the player is, usually with input from the goalie behind you. Offensive players in a fast break scenario should make every effort to be a threat where possible, both on ball and off ball. Essentially, this means keeping their stick up in the triple threat position as much as possible, and on-ball players in particular being a threat to shoot at all times, which entices opposing defenders to overcommit, ultimately leaving one less defender and more space for teammates involved in this odd player advantage. Sometimes a defender will fake to commit to the ball carrier, but instead hitching, where they act like they're going to slide over to the ball carrier, but instead slide to the open player. A common use of hitching is when defending against a 3-on-2 in transition. It is also important to take inventory in this situation when considering whether to hitch or not. When sliding or finishing a check, the less obvious the defender can make their move, usually the more effective it will be, which can sometimes be a good tactic early in games to let them know that you are sliding to collide. Speaking of finishing your check, it is generally a good habit to always finish your check when playing defense. However, when splitting two players, staying off ball and guarding space is actually more important, only committing to the ball carrier if they're becoming a serious threat while not letting anyone else open behind you for a 1-on-0 with your goalie. In all other scenarios, a save is expected on a somewhat marginal quality shot in what could otherwise be a very dangerous situation. For practicing 2-on-1s for beginners and younger players, coaches should consider starting with a pylon at the top center of the prime scoring area instead of a defender, giving players a feel for where they should expect to make a pass, eventually adding some dummy defense from a coach, and later an actual defender. Another key concept for ball carriers is learning to open up their hips when making the pass, meaning instead of their hips facing the end boards or north-south while running towards the net, opening them up 90 degrees to facing the sideboards, aka east-west, making for a higher percentage pass. Start with two lines of players on their proper floor side facing one or both directions, with all lines having a chance to start with balls, otherwise a coach sending in a pass to a different line each time. For beginners, start slow, around 50% of maximum speed, advancing to full speed during the latter reps through the drill. In some cases, it might even be best to start at walking speed and build up to a slow jog. In variation number 1A, defenders starting at the rag line, a volunteer defender should ideally start split between both offensive lines, a few steps below the restraining line, which players are not doing a great job of in this video. It is ultimately more game specific to have a defender running back with the play versus standing flat-footed and waiting for the play to arrive. Following the first rep through the drill, the last offensive player to touch the ball is out of the drill, running along the sideboards and back into line, while the other offensive player gets into defensive positioning for the next 2-on-1. In variation number 1B, defenders starting at the bench, everything is the same as the previous variation, except a couple of volunteer defenders should start in a line close to a real or hypothetical defensive door, with the last offensive players to touch the ball rejoining their respective offensive line and the other player joining the defensive line at the bench. All players in the drill should keep an eye if there's an open line that is visibly short and fill that line, with coaches also being sure to start defensive players from the opposite sides of the floor, switching sides halfway through the drill. Variation number 2 is the quick stick finish, which is the same as the previous variations, except players are asked by the coaches to finish with a quick stick shot on net, or generally use quick sticks as much as reasonably possible. Variation number 3 is 3-on-2s, which is a similar setup to 2-on-1s, except 2 volunteer players play defense and a third line of offensive players are stationed in the middle lane. It may also be beneficial for inexperienced players to first do skeleton 3-on-2s with no defenders, as we did with 2-on-1s. In this case, players in the middle line start by running forward and not passing until they're at the cusp of the prime scoring area, which again is marked with a pylon. The outside line that receives the first pass ideally looks like they're going to take it to shoot, many times actually shooting in a game, then passing to the other outside line as they cut towards the net, which is the classic 3-on-2 breakdown. This player looks at the net as if they're shooting, which is option number 1, and shoots, or passes to the trailer who started the drill in the middle lane, which is option number 2, finishing with a shot from their proper floor side, which requires them to slow up after they make the first pass, and finish at their proper floor side shooter position versus the top of the crease, which is a mistake many beginners will make. Players then exit the drill by jogging along the sideboards and out of the way of the next group up in the drill. Once defenders are added, the defensive players fall back into the I formation, which is the standard formation when defending against a 3-on-2 fast break, also defending the offensive players up as high as possible, running back to the net and matching their speed. An I defensive formation is where 2 teammates are in a straight line north-south relative to each other, with their sticks up, facing up the floor. When a 3-on-2 approaches from center floor, the high defender in the I formation is responsible for the first slide as the ball carrier becomes a threat. The high defender has the option to finish the check or try to recover to the backside of the play, with the low defender now committed to splitting between the 2 remaining players. And if the 3-on-2 approaches from the side, the low defender is responsible for the first slide. High defenders recovering to the open player, usually on the backside of the play. Following the first rep of this 3-on-2 drill, the last offensive player to touch the ball is now out of the drill, jogging around the outside and back into line, with the other 2 offensive players staying in on defense, which is variation number 3A. Otherwise, if defenders are starting from the bench, as in variation number 3B, these players run out of the drill and to the bench, replacing the other 2 volunteer defenders who are set to participate in the drill. To break down a 3-on-2, the offensive player who starts with the ball should carry it to the middle, with the outside players running their lanes as hard as they can towards the crease, stopping on a 45-degree angle in the outside lane in front of the crease if need be. Once the ball carrier receives pressure, they should pass the ball to either outside lane, otherwise go to the net for a shot if they don't receive pressure, being deceptive in their actions. Players in the outside lane are essential in a 2-on-1 after this first pass is made, and should either shoot or pass depending on who has a better angle or higher percentage opportunity. Variation number 4 is to start players either progressively closer or progressively further away. It is the same as variation number 1 and number 3, except all players start progressively closer to the net in variation 4A or further from the net in variation 4B each time through the drill. By starting players closer to the net, they have to make quicker decisions, and by moving them further back into the defensive zone, it adds more of a cardio and game-like element, replicating some of the most prevalent scenarios in the game. Variation number 5 adds a chaser, which is applicable to all of the previous variations, the only difference being that a second or third defender in the case of a 3-on-2 starts 3 to 5 meters behind the play and chases offensive players in an attempt to bring the play back to even strength. If they are able to bring it back to full strength, offensive players have another 10 seconds to get off a quality shot before the coaches whistle the play dead. The chaser should alternate between coming from the line of lefties and the line of righties each rep through the drill until all players have had a turn chasing.